Hello. Today I'm going to talk about my roller coaster battle with Connecticon. Now, as some of you know, I am on the autism spectrum, and that'll become important a little bit later. That said, in 2019, I applied to be on staff in the photography department for photoshopping and publications on social media for Connecticon. That aspect will come important later, and this was for the 2020 con. Now, to be on staff, one must purchase a weekend pass. Now, in hindsight, that should have been a red flag, which we will break down later. But I didn't think anything of it at the time. That said, as you probably know, it was postponed in June of 2020 due to COVID-19. Now, at that time, I was planning to be out of the state of Connecticut no later than June 2021. So I was not anticipating the fact that I would actually be able to attend the following year as I was graduating college and just starting to apply for jobs all over the country. New Orleans, Boston, California, and I kept applying all the way up to June 2021. And that whole time, June 2020 to July of 2021, I was asking for the $95 for the weekend pass back, as I just didn't plan on attending. Now, the only reason why I ended up being on staff and attending is that those opportunities never came through fruition. So I was on staff for that weekend. At this point, it had to be pushed back to September 10th to the 12th, 2021. Now, I went through the unpaid training, which we will get to that problem in a minute, that they require everyone to do, and I did see some potential red flags, like the policy forbidding asking a question to the main guy, requiring staff to go up through the chain of commands. It was a potential red flag, but then again, I didn't think it was going to be a problem, and to be fair, it wasn't going to be an issue for me. There were other policies, mainly around payment, that I didn't think of much at the time, but would become incredibly interesting later down the line. The first was that the first 6 hours one day only counted for reimbursement for the pass. The second was that one had to go in person to collect payment, or it would count as a forfeit, including reimbursement. And I will break that down in a little bit. But there is one policy that could be a potential problem for me. In this case, zero tolerance against harassment. And I am on the spectrum. But because of the fact I'm on the spectrum, I did know that if anything were to happen, there would be only so much that they could legally do, as they would still be required to abide by the Americans with Disabilities Act. Title IX does not trump ADA. The only way it could do that is if something egregious happens. Now, I wasn't planning on doing anything, but I knew if something did came up, this would be the scenario. That said, after the training, the whole staff went on duty. Now, once on duty, due to a mix-up at the top, all the assignments I was hired to do, photoshopping, publications, were going to be done the next day. So, to help kill some time, my immediate supervisor had me take some videos, and I did. And I did take them, and I was then told to submit them the next day. Importance of that will come later as well. After that, due to the lack of stuff for me to do, I was sent off. I did get some pictures from some of the guests of honors, as well as some signatures from them. Now, there was an incident with one of the female guests of honors due to my autism. Now, I did apologize for my behavior, and even she admit it's understandable, it's not harassment. Now, for privacy's sake, I am not going to name her name. And since the incident, things have been patched up to an extent. Still, I do think I feel that we have a long way to go, but put that on a little later. But it was this that was the catalyst for nearly a year and a half for a battle with the con. But in the meantime, I went home. I got back the next day, September 11th, 2021, and told there was a harassment complaint and I need to explain behavior. They did not go into any details about the problem at that time. I did say that any problems with my behavior would be because of my autism. They said they do not accept autism as an excuse. I point out to them that that is a potential violation of the ADA. They stuck to their guns and later banned me for life. I did say that this firing is under potential violation of the ADA, but due to the fact I was fired before I could collect payment and submit my videos, I was not paid and could not submit my videos. After that, I do go home and start to get to work on filing an Equal Employment Opportunity Commission complaint, or EEOC complaint, on the basis of illegal termination based on my disability. It took a few weeks, but they got me in. But because I was classified as an independent contractor, we'll get to that in more detail as well, the EEOC couldn't do anything, but I, of course, was given the right to sue, which is technically speaking what I wanted. But this would force me to stay nearby Hartford, Connecticut to fight this and get some justice. But remember, all the jobs I'm trying to get are all over the country. And because of that, I was actually forced to stop applying for jobs. Now, before I could file a federal lawsuit, the case was then handed down to the state equivalent of the EEOC. In this case, the Connecticut Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, or CHRO. Now, for the next few months, it went through the CHRO while I would do gaming, continue horseback ridings, and try to find funding for my YouTube expeditions. Although, to help try to prove that I was not a NEET, I did go back to school for a semester to do some post-undergrad, pre-grad work. But during this time, I learned that due to the fact I was unpaid, classified as an independent contractor, but treated like staff, and charged to work one day, I caught Connecticon effectively dead to rights in violation of the Fair Labor Standards Act. And guess which has more penalties? Yeah, Fair Labor Standards Act. As violators of the Fair Labor Standards Act are considered thieves in the eyes of the government. It's called wage theft. Also, when Connecticon did do their filings, they claimed I was reimbursed, which in reality I was not, so they've made a false statement to the investigators. Now, I don't want to say that they lied, particularly as they did send reimbursement via Grotix after I sent a rebuttal letter to the CHRO in response to their filings the day before Valentine's Day. But it was still a false statement, and it could easily be proven false. And it was sent 5 whole months after they were legally required to be in compliance with Connecticut law that is modeled after the Fair Labor Standards Act. In this case, simply September 13th. And they didn't send it out until February 13th. Furthermore, they only did reimbursement when under Connecticut law, they would be required to pay double. And this is all on the assumption that reimbursement in and of itself can support the Fair Labor Standards Act, which I don't think it does. But after another 2 months, the CHRO found they were unable to do anything as well, and I had to sue. Now, I did put it off for a few weeks, as this was sent out just 2 weeks before my term project was due at the time for the course I was in, and was delivered weeks before finals. And if anyone knows anything about that time in a semester, they know the stress that it has. But once it was over, I did start to file, although I did file a motion to waive the fees and was granted. Now, to some extent, I did make a few mistakes, like filing in small claims rather than major civil, as that would mean it would only be money, and I could not get the lifetime ban overturned. But all of this is still being done on principle, so small claims wasn't the worst mistake. Now, they were served, and they did try to drag it out just as they had done during the CHRO investigation. And they repeated a lot of their same claims, and all in relationship to the termination. But they were also hoping to one-up me this time, and they submitted an additional aspect. They had mainly a performance notice, pointing out to the fact that my skills were not appropriate that they had to do that day, which was digital studio photography, and the fact that I had not turned in the video that I did have. But I would remind you, I was not hired to do digital studio photography. I was hired for photoshopping and publishing. And due to the fact I was fired before I could submit the video, the performance statement was effectively null and void. And furthermore, they never addressed the clear violations of the Fair Labor Standards Act. I then submitted a rebuttal for that. Now, all these delays would mean that I would miss the next Connecticon, as the hearing was scheduled for the following Friday. But then again, all this takes time. But with the hearing came the first of Connecticon's biggest mistakes in their entire existence, as they failed to show up for the hearing. So default judgment in my favor. And with that, they can now be called thieves. Not sure I would say that per se, but it can be said in general, as they cannot sue for defamation. Because if one has a judgment against them for wage theft, well, it's going to be pretty hard to have that excluded from a defamation suit. But for now, that's neither here nor there. And they had 30 days to pay the judgment, worth what I was estimating $300 in damages and a $8.95 service fee, totaling for now $308.95. Then this is where they make the second of their biggest mistakes probably in their entire existence, as the 30 days came and went with nothing. Side note, it should know by now that the potential contempt that Connecticon has for the law is becoming a bit apparent. But it also makes way for my next move, applying for a writ of execution with a $105 fee, now totaling $413.95, which means that a judicial marshal could show up to their place with a badge and a gun and start taking things. Now, this couldn't happen in this particular case, as it was against the bank accounts that Connecticon were using. Think more wage garment than forfeiture of stuff, but still. But if this had gone down differently, yeah, it could have happened. The court approved the execution and was submitted to my local marshal, now into the end of October of 2022. And here is where things get interesting. After over 2 months, now into early 2023, the marshal's office could not find who Connecticon banks with, which makes another red flag, which I'll break down in short order of time. but I first had to find out the banking info. I asked around to a variety of legal help sites, but had a little luck. But was ultimately able to file a request for documents demanding the info, as well as notifying the court. But instead of sending the request documents, Connecticon just cut a check for $400.13. But instead of sending the requested documents, Connecticon just cut a check for $413.95, which they are allowed to do in this scenario. Now, the check was good, and this is just the receipt, but the info on the check raises a few questions than it does answer. As the filings to the commission and the court all have a West Hartford address, but the check has a Wallingford address. Should note that this is the only place I have a document with that address. Now, this would explain why I might have had trouble with the execution, but it does raise a new question that I alluded to earlier, particularly after they have already been outed as effectively thieves in the eyes of the government. Does the IRS want to have a little discussion with Connecticon? We got some figures we need to discuss with y'all. I'm sorry, but that is a terrible mafioso impression. I do apologize. But you get the idea? And then again, that's how it always goes down. A company screws over the one person who knows they've been screwed over. We'll try to seek justice, and we'll try to seek justice at all costs. And then they unearth a whole bunch of other violations. Now, the other violations I'm not personally going to look into, nor am I going to try to reverse the ban at this point, as I have the check, and will have a submitted a notice of compliance by the time this video is up. It's not perfect, it's justice. But this case and the filings are a warning to other cons. As all of them are up online, you are being put on notice. Title IX does not trump ADA. Fair Labor Standards Act is the law and must be followed. And the IRS has pretty strict rules. And if you do not adhere to these, you will be held accountable. Thanks for watching. If you like what I do here, be sure to like and subscribe, and also click the other links in the video to see a whole bunch more of my personal life as well as my professional life under Robbie the Cryptozoologist. Thanks, and have a nice day.